because I think that's pretty inspiring and pretty amazing about the guy that went through all the councils to look for contradictions in the church. And I know there's other people that have done that, right?
Well,
He was 20.
Avery Dulles was a young man, and he was Presbyterian. He is the son of John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State under President Eisenhower, just to put him in a historical context. As a young man, like many young men, he kind of lost his faith, or was having a struggle with his faith, his Presbyterian faith, his Protestant faith. And he went to different churches, and he just wasn't satisfied. Finally, he went, because of his professor, who was a Catholic historian, I think at Columbia University. He took a look at the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was the last thing in the world, as Scott mentions about himself, the last place he would look to get any kind of guidance. That was out. Rome, Catholic Church, the Pope, that whole thing. With his tradition as a Presbyterian, that was not the place to go. But he finally said, he was going to try this. If there was nothing there, he was prepared to give up Christ, not only the Presbyterian Church, but to give up everything. So he started to study the Catholic teaching, and this after a long time. And he then, when he got close, and he realized the idea of infallibility, he realized how important infallibility was, but he didn't know if it was a fact. He saw it in the New Testament. He knows the church teaches that. So what he wanted to do is, he felt if he could find an infallible teaching that contradicted another infallible teaching, obviously it's not infallibility. There is fallibility there. So he did go actually through the councils of the church, the ecumenical councils. He was definitely a scholar. He still is today. And he found, and I read this in he wrote a little book called A Testimonial to Grace, I don't know, around 1951 or so. And he since revised it recently after the Vatican Council. But he shows his whole journey through all the philosophers, Thomas Aquinas, and then the scriptures, and then the Catholic Church, the councils, and he thought he found a contradiction when Pope, I forget his name, Liberius, or some pope, was going to declare that the Latin Vulgate edition of the Bible was without error, was perfect. He thought, oh boy, here it is. Well, he found out the Pope died before he made that statement. Well, nobody after him ever made that statement. But he did not find any contradictions in what the Church officially taught in any of the ecumenical councils. That was his, that was it. He said, well, nobody's infallible, naturally. This has got to be a supernatural. God's hand has to be in here someplace for this to take place. Because people, being who they are, and as fallible as they are, and as weak and proud and everything else, somebody in one council in the 5th century says something, somebody in the 11th or 12th or 13th or 15th, 16th century, going to be a tendency to say, well, let's drop that and let's do this instead. But he couldn't find any of that going on. And that was it. It was one of the things that led him into the Catholic Church.
And other people have done that too.
I don't know other people. I would take his
Yeah.
word for it. I wouldn't go through all the councils. Not all of us are capable of that.
Right.
This is why at some point, you accept the teaching of the magisterium, and you also take the best of
What
what
is
you
that
see.
teaching of the magisterium? What is,
The magister means teacher.
yeah.
So the magisterium of the church means, what does the church, meaning all the councils and
Yeah.
the church officially teach. If you asked, the Holy Father today something, what would that teacher teach you? It's a living teacher as
Yeah.
opposed to a dead book. So we say the book needs a living teacher. And so we go to the magisterium to find out what the book means. So this is why that word is used to gather up all the teaching, the official teaching. Not my teaching,
Yeah.
but the official teaching of the church. Now, you as a Catholic hope that I'm giving you authentic teaching of the Catholic Church. You are not interested in what I think. And that's the whole idea behind the magisterium. You are protected from me.
From you.
From me,
As a priest.
priest. If a person in this parish suddenly hears something from that pulpit that offends his Catholic sense, and he says to the bishop, Father Yennock's teaching some stuff here that I've never heard before, and it doesn't seem to be Catholic teaching, the bishop is obliged to find out what I'm teaching, and if I'm not teaching, I'm teaching heresy, he's obliged to get me out. And the same way, if the bishop starts teaching something that we say, oh, wait a minute, that's not Catholic teaching, we're obliged to get him out.
Yeah.
So there's an authority and a hierarchy and a checks and check and balances that protects you from the individual priest. I mean, I could have, be a megalomaniac, and as we have some around who are having their own ideas about what the church should be, and you say, well, who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you getting that?
Made it up.
Well, this is what I think. I have a superior intelligence. Luther,